I just realized I didn't do anything with my hair this morning, and I'm going to look kind of foolish. But on the positive side, how awesome is this Rowdy Roddy Piper shirt? I mean, that just fills me with happiness. I just got to bask in it for a minute, you know? Anyway, so I got you guys thinking about the jump the shark thing. And for the life of me, I can't remember if I went on my Family Matters rant last time. I probably talked about it a little bit. If you ever get the chance, look up Family Matters and when they jump the shark, because Family Matters as a show is just so brilliant in its awfulness. There is like this, there's this phenomenon in pop culture, which I don't know if we've ever had this before now in human history, but making fun of something to the point that bad media becomes enjoyable in its own way. Like, that's weird when you really stop and think about the fact that people actually watch movies for the sole purpose of their badness. And Family Matters is kind of like a really, really good example of that. That show was just terrible. Anyway, I don't want to waste another whole video just talking about potential jump the shark moments. I think we've done enough of that. Let's actually move to a little bit more of a useful discussion in the conversation of writing itself. Now, typically with these classes, one of the things I end up doing in the beginning is just very loose, happy, sort of general fun conversations where we just talk about, all sorts of different topics that we can explore. And I don't really give you a lot of direction. But this time, I kind of want to give you a little bit more structured help in the beginning. So what I want to do today is talk about intros. Now, introductions are tough because when we think about introductions, most everyone, when they're writing a paper, when they sit down and they begin the writing process, you're staring at that blank page. People are going to start by writing the introduction first. Now, this makes logical sense in a lot of ways because you start with the beginning, right? You start at the beginning. But in actuality, there's some real problems with this method, and everybody does it. The best way I can describe this problem is imagine introducing someone you've never met before, right? It's actually going to be really difficult to do. I do this in some of my early classes. I ask everybody to stand up. I pick two random people out of the class. I ask one to introduce the other. And it's obviously an awkward, weird mess because how do you introduce someone that you don't know? You might fumble about with their name. You might make some comments on how they're dressed, which if they're anything like me, fantastic. But for the most part, it's going to have a lot of pauses. It's going to have a lot of hesitation. And of course, because you don't know that person. Now, this is the exact same thing that happens when you write an introduction for a paper first. You are introducing something that you know nothing about by virtue of the fact that it doesn't exist yet. If you really want to introduce a paper, you need to go ahead and write at least the bulk of it so that you understand its behavior, you understand the points that it's going to make, and then you can more competently talk about the thing that you're introducing. I've also argued in the past that part of the reason people get so hung up on writer's block is because they're doing exactly this. How on earth do you introduce something that doesn't even exist yet? It's going to be just like introducing a person you don't know. It's going to be strange. It's going to be awkward. It's going to be weird. It's going to absolutely obliterate your confidence. So what you want to do instead is you want to, and again, a lot of times when I'm recording these videos, I'm giving you advice, right? And I would like to think that you guys trust me enough to try out my advice. But at the end of the day, you can write it any damn way you want, right? You can go about this any way you feel the most comfortable. But I've published a few times. I kind of know what I'm doing, okay? So one of the best things you can do is to just start. And rather than burning out your brain, trying to do that intro first, just start in the middle. Start with a detail, right? Start with something that would fall right in the center of your dang paper. It actually takes a lot of pressure off that initial writing session because you don't have to establish anything. You're just making one singular point about what you want to talk about. You take a great deal of pressure off of yourself. Now, the funny thing is, the big piece of advice I wanted to give you guys today is essentially write your introduction last, or at least work your way around to it when it's more realistic to do it. But there is kind of a weird cheat code to this. And the funny thing is even though it's a cheat code that you could use to write the introduction first, the situation in which it came about actually came last. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you guys the greatest introduction to a student paper that I have ever had. And it was so good, I actually committed the thing to memory. That's how good it was. This was earlier in my career. And it was the Jump the Shark assignment. So this is part of the reason why I decided to bring this assignment back. I haven't done this assignment in a long time because I kind of felt like this was a little bit childish in a lot of ways, but looking back on it, I realized, no, there's some really good stuff in this assignment that actually reinforces a lot of really cool kind of like writing concepts. So the point here is what we were talking about was Jump the Shark, and the student wrote about Pokemon. Now, this student, and this is something I don't really do anymore, but I used to really like grade based upon where I assessed a person's individual ability sat. So if you were a really good writer and you brought me something, otherwise passable, but I could tell you didn't put a lot of effort into it, I was very likely to just hand it back to you and say, I'm not grading this because I know you can do better. Now, I guess maybe I just got lazy and I don't do that anymore, or maybe I got less mean. But yeah, I used to do stuff like that. And this student who wrote about Pokemon, it was a lazy intro. It was an incredibly lazy intro, and he kept handing it to me over and over again, and I kept handing it back to him, and I kept going, it's not good enough, it's not good enough. And I was just hung up on how bad his intros were. Now, the funny thing is, it was about Pokemon, right? And I'll go ahead and tell you what his Jump the Shark moment was. His Jump the Shark moment was, I think, season 2, where they go to a new region and there's like 100 new Pokemon, right? In his childhood years, he had spent so much time memorizing Pokemon and learning about all the Pokemon. And then all of a sudden he's like overwhelmed because he's like, I got to learn 100 more of these damn things. And he was like, I think I want to go outside and play, right? Excellent Jump the Shark moment. It was more of a personal one, right? So in any case, paper was great, but the intro just made me want to bang my head against the wall. And this is something that really works when I'm doing a classroom discussion. But let's stop and think about this for a minute. If you were doing a Jump the Shark paper on Pokemon, and you were one of those who sits down and writes their intro first, how would you most likely start it? Most people would do, a couple of very cliched things. And cliche is something I want to talk about because, it's really easy to go and grade a paper and give it a bad grade because it's got a lot of comma errors or a lot of incomplete sentences, whatever. But it's something completely different to actually take issue with creative problems and cliche. Most students have not been asked to break cliches. Most student writing is so dependent on cliche. And for those of you out there who don't know what cliche is, a cliche is a tried and true, repetitive, obnoxious idea that comes up over and over and over again. So an example of a cliche would be starting a paper with a dictionary definition. And I'm never going to forget, he was like defining, I don't think he defined Pokemon, but I think he defined like cartoon or something like that. And I was like, oh my gosh, how creative. You started with a dictionary definition. I've never seen that before, right? And then he was like, I was trying to be interesting. And I was like, I don't know what kind of parties you get invited to, but dictionary definitions are not interesting. Although, to be fair, every party I went to in graduate school, we ended up bringing out the Oxford's Unabridged Dictionary to argue over the meaning of a word. But we were weird, right? We were weird. In any case, the first thing he did was like define cartoon or something like that. And then he did this, and this is cliche as well. He was like, gotta catch them all. Pokemon was a cartoon that debuted in the 90s in Japan. And I was like, what did Pikachu ever do to you, man? Why do you hate Pikachu so much that you're taking his show and you're just dumping all over it like that? You're better than this, right? Now, with anybody else, I would have been fine with it. But in this case, I knew this student could do better. So intro after intro after intro, he kept relying on those cliches, and I kept handing it back. And finally, he got really mad. He got like crazy, I'm going out of my mind mad because I just can't seem to get past this assignment. And he wrote what very much seemed to be an intro that was meant to be like, punching me in the face or giving me a very particular digit, all right? A singular digit. In any case, his angry intro went something like this. And to this day, I still remember it because of how good it was. But I thoroughly believe that when he handed it in, he thought he was going to be in trouble for it. Here's what he wrote. I feel like I should dim the light. I'm going to dim the lights for dramatic effect. It's that good. I'm totally doing it. He wrote, let's let the camera focus. He wrote, I wake up. By the blue light of my alarm clock, I float ghost-like down the hall. I gather my Superman comforter around my shoulders and float ghost-like down the hall. I come to the kitchen and bring down a salad bowl. I pour an entire box of Fruit Loops into the bowl. I then pour more than half a gallon of milk into the salad bowl and create a fruity rainbow concoction. I drift once again to the television and turn it to my favorite channel to watch my favorite show. Little did I know, this was the day that, for me, Pokemon died. Now, let's talk about what I'm going to turn the lights back on because it's weird. Let's talk about what he did with that intro. The intro itself defies convention. It goes against what you would think would be standard for a paper like that. He tells me a story, a narrative, right? He's telling the story about his morning routine or the rituals that he was going through that morning. And it's funny because it appeals to a lot of the senses. I have taste, I have image, I even have a little bit of touch with like the Superman comforter around his shoulders. And I don't know if you guys have ever tasted Fruit Loop milk, but if I could buy a bottle of Fruit Loop milk at the gas station, even being as diabetic as I am, I'd be very tempted. Fruit Loop milk is delicious, right? Now, I'm so off track. Anyway, this introduction told a story, and the story actually is extremely captivating, right? Every time I talk about that intro in front of a class, there's always a few students who aren't paying attention on any given day. Sometimes they're fiddling on their phones or they're doing something. I try not to get too upset about students on their phones. I kind of think of that as like a friendly reminder that I need to be more interesting. I have a responsibility to be interesting as an instructor, which I don't always manage. There are plenty of times where I am so boring that I'm pretty sure I've killed people, right? I have that capacity in me, but I try not to take it personal. But when I tell that story, people in the class, they look at me, right? People dial in and they're listening. And the funny thing is honestly, it's really not that special. What he put together is, pretty mundane. It's about a ritual in the morning going to watch a Saturday morning cartoon. So what works about it? What works is the fact that it's sensory. We're going to talk a lot more about this as we move through this semester. One of the things that I've learned is I don't have to entirely cover a concept in totality in a single lesson. I can kind of come back to concepts, right? We can work with concepts in different ways, but this is something we're going to come back to, the idea of appealing to the senses. If you can appeal to coffee. Anyway. Deep breaths. I've had a lot of caffeine this morning. Anyway, if you can appeal to a person's senses, if you can put an image in their head or give them a taste, give them a sight, give them a smell, even if it's not very interesting what's going on the page, people really dial into that for stuff. It's almost primal how well it works. And I told him to his face when I got the paper, he handed in, he had that intro. I read it. I was like, nailed it. I was like, A, you got an A. I'm not even going to read the rest of it. You got an A on the paper. And he was like, I've written this paper like 10 times. And all I had to do was tell you a story about getting out of bed, and that gets me the A. I'm like, yep, absolutely. That's what I was looking for. I'm glad I don't do stuff like that anymore, because I think pretty much one of my students would eventually punch me in the face if I kept doing that. But it makes for some really interesting writing, and I'm glad I picked that fight with that student at that point, because it gives me a really good story to tell. But the point is, the intro does not necessarily have to do those standard cliche things that a lot of your writing instructors in the past kind of asked you to do. You need to try to be interesting in your intro. Maybe use a dictionary definition. Or outline everything you're about to do in order and then go and do it. Or use an interesting quote. These are all things that just, in my opinion, I'm not saying you can't do those things. You can. But keep in mind, a lot of the times when readers read stuff like that, they're going to roll their eyes because it's cliche. And what that student did that time was very not cliche. It worked. And the funny thing was, this is something we haven't talked about too much yet. Maybe we'll talk about this on Wednesday. Did you notice he also did something really classical there? He was really breaking a lot of rules. But at the end of his intro, he actually gave what's called a thesis statement, an argument, right? And that argument was that this was the day Pokemon died. This episode was the episode that killed Pokemon for me. But that being said, the two things I want to encourage you guys for your intros. One, don't write them first, because you're going to end up raising the difficulty for yourself, and it's going to make it very unnatural and weird, and you're going to end up staring at that blank page. Two, don't get trapped in the idea that the intro has to do something typical and cliched like that. An intro has a little bit of freedom to play if it needs to. It can take risks. It can do stuff that's not standard, especially for a paper like this, where we're not exactly talking about high academia here. We're talking about television, and, you know, there's a lot of room for silliness and fun. In any case, here's what I want you to do for today. I want you to write an intro. I know it's really weird, right? Don't write your intro first. Okay, now you're going to write an intro. And you guys, I know this is very inappropriate. I'm going to do it because I know I got young people watching this, but I'm going to do it. There's an episode of Chappelle Show where Rick James, it's the True Hollywood Stories with Charlie Murphy. And Rick James, after Charlie Murphy talks about Rick James putting his muddy feet all over his couch. And Rick James is like, I never did that. That's he's talking about me going in and rubbing my muddy feet all over a couch like that's something you do. That's crazy. Anyway, so yeah, I totally grinded my feet on his couch. And it's like, that's what I just did, right? Don't write your intro first, but let's write our intro first. But we're going to write these intros, and we're going to try to do something weird and creative with it, right? Now, don't think I'm going to go in and grade this stuff harshly. I just kind of want to go in and see what it is you're doing, and just kind of like, you know, again, we're playing right now. We're having fun with the idea. So do something weird, do something fun, do something strange. Write me an intro. Let's shoot for, I don't know, let's go for about 8 sentences. Let's not get too carried away with this. 8 sentences for a dummy intro. You do not have to use it, but if you want to, I would say you certainly can for the first draft of this thing. Anyway, I think that's enough for today. We'll talk a little bit more about, and I need to write this down. We're going to talk more about argument next time, and like argumentative strategies to prove that these things are your jump the shark moment, because I have a feeling you guys probably need some help with that. Argumentation is not easy. Argumentation is actually quite difficult in a lot of ways. So that's what we'll focus on next time. Anyway, hope you guys have a great week, and you will see me on Wednesday. Respect the shirt.